Afternoon po. Afternoon. Good afternoon po. Good afternoon. Din Pat. Bang.
Good afternoon, Father.
Afternoon.
Sorry, nagkaon ko.
Kailangan mga ta. Ita.
Kung pwede lang.
Pat.
Please. Please. How about the part-time faculty?
Yes, ma'am. Hindi ko po masyadong marinig, ma'am. Medyo maano. Sandali lang, ma'am. Adjust ko lang volume ko. Yes, ma'am, Pat.
Yung part-time faculty, where are they?
Hala, saan man sila, ma'am? Nasabihan man sila, ma'am. Remind ko po, ma'am.
Oh, kasi we're waiting for them.
Opo.
Good afternoon po. Good afternoon din, Pat.
Good afternoon,
everyone.
Father. We'll just follow up. Give us 5 minutes lang, Father,
Sige
ha?
lang po. Okay lang po. Sige po.
Konti pa lang tayo. 7 pa lang nandito. Puro regular pa.
Sige.
He will be sa why dapig-dapig. Siya na lang po ng instruction. Afternoon.
Afternoon
I'm
po.
with Purposive Com, one of the members of the he will be sa why dapig-dapig. Siya.
Good afternoon. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Pam. Thanks, Pam.
Thanks, Father.
Annalyn, hello. Hello.
Hey, Father, good afternoon.
Afternoon
I'm
po.
with Purposive Com, one of the members of the team.
Thank you. Thank you po. Okay. So, in terms of, especially for those who are
Naglabas. Thank you. Please. Thank you. Father Oji, we're still waiting for our part-time faculty, but I
Sige lang
guess
po.
they will all come in late. Baka they're from the proctoring kasi, Father.
Yeah. It's okay. Okay lang po. I'm just here. I'm just
Ma'am, yung iba nag-message, mahirap daw makakonect sa internet.
Oo, talaga ba?
Uh,
What can we do, Father?
in case they have difficulties, they could I'm sending a link here because I'm also streaming this through YouTube, so they could watch to YouTube if
Okay. So, can,
So this can be replayed, Father. This can be replayed.
yes, it can
This
be replayed
okay.
sa YouTube.
would you like to start na lang, Father?
Sige po. Yeah. Will there be people coming in or go ahead?
I guess they were all informed. See, Doc Lisa was the one who, at the same time, we forwarded the link to them in our group chat. But no word from them, Father, if they cannot come, but they were already informed. I guess they will be coming in late lang po.
Sige po.
Hopefully.
Maybe would it be okay parang we begin at 3:30 na lang kung ano?
Okay, Father.
Sige po.
Okay po. Thank you.
Thank you po. Good afternoon again.
No, good afternoon, Father.
Yun po. So maybe I could start with today's presentation. Okay lang po.
Please po.
Okay.
Go ahead, Father.
Okay. So anyway, this is also being live streamed through YouTube. So those who might have difficulties connecting can just view this on the YouTube link that I have shared earlier. Si Roy actually attended this session already when we met as instructional designers. No? So hopefully with this session, parang we would all be on the same page, so that uh, what Roy will be doing as instructional designer may not come as a surprise to everyone, since basically what I'll do today is to explain about our own instructional design, which underpins our courseware development project. So once again, good afternoon po to everyone, and allow me to make this presentation so that we could more or less, as I said, understand our own instructional design model. So may I just, I don't know if let me put myself as a spotlight, no? Since my slides will also be presented to this spotlight. Okay. So, okay. I hope you're all seeing the screen that I'm showing right now. So the title of this presentation is the Ignatian Pedagogical Paradigm as Instructional Design for Online Education. In the times that I've been giving this talk, I've also included an additional phrase there, that this IPP is more than just an instructional design for online education, and later I'll be explaining why. To start off, I'd like to say something about Jesuit education. I think we have to clarify for ourselves where we're coming from in terms of this effort that we are doing um, for the development of courseware for the university. I think one of the interests that we have is really how could we put our own stamp on the kind of education that we are offering, despite this new platform that we are forced to embrace. Um, so in other words, could we still assure our students, could we still assure our faculty that the education that we are providing, regardless of the disciplines that we are in, will this education still bear the distinctive spirit of Jesuit education? Now you might ask, what is this distinctive spirit that makes this education Jesuit education? Now this spirit which animates our own teaching and learning in a Jesuit university is can actually be traced to the life of Saint Ignatius of Loyola. So in other words, this our intellectual activity and all our engagements in a Jesuit university finds its roots um, in 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 the experience of Saint Ignatius. No? So in a way, we're not just teaching for teaching's sake. We're teaching because there is a spiritual importance to this work that we're doing in the Jesuit University. And much of this spirit flows not only from the life of Saint Ignatius, but it flows out um, into the Society of Jesus, into the writings of Saint Ignatius, and right now even into this ministry of which we are also a part of. So this whole educational enterprise really can trace its heritage to that spiritual inspiration that Saint Ignatius provided. And so it is in looking at St. Ignatius's life that we can find ourselves taking root in terms of our efforts in a Jesuit university. So I I think something has to be said about uh, the pedagogy that underlies Jesuit education. So for the Jesuits, pedagogy is not just a method or methodology of teaching somebody, but pedagogy, as we understand it, has a broader meaning. Broader because it includes a certain worldview and a vision of what we imagine uh, human life could be like. Um, it's basically giving us a perspective which goes beyond just the mere goal of educating somebody, but it extends towards that idea of how human life could be envisioned, at least through the education that we are providing. So, in a sense, that worldview, that vision of what a human person could be like, is the goal and the end of everything that we are doing in a Jesuit university. So, therefore, with this goal in mind, all our efforts are therefore to be oriented towards the pursuit of this goal. So, right from the outset, parang very clear to us where we're coming from and where we are heading. No? Where we're coming from, we are starting again from the inspiration of Saint Ignatius. Where we're heading, this is all part of um, the kind of human person and the kind of world that we would wish not only for ourselves but also for our students as well. So the ultimate goal of Jesuit education is this, no? What we want to imagine or what we want to form at the end of it all is a human person who is flourishing. Flourishing in the sense that he's able to know who he is or know who she is, but at the same time, after this knowledge and after this self-awareness, is able to do something good for the world so that whatever he or she gets out of this Jesuit education is something that he or she is now able to share with the rest of humanity. But this sharing is also informed, of course, by the growth that this person experiences in his or her own faith. No? So I think when you put all these things together, we're really looking at the holistic formation of the human person, so that this education is not just a matter of acquiring degrees, being able to learn a particular skill, but this education is supposed to help us discover what our giftedness is, what our giftedness is, what our gifts are, so that we may be able to offer them for others as well. So, in a sense, it's a very bold and ambitious goal. But I think this is one of the things that really differentiate us from other educational institutions, because who we're after and what we're after is not just knowledge, it's not just skill, it's not just credentials, but what we're really after is that when you take all the things that a person learns in the Jesuit university, um, that all these things will contribute to his own development as a human person, so that he becomes, in the words of Saint Irenaeus, a human person who is fully alive. Having said that, I think we have to address the question of instructional design. Where does instructional design find its place in Jesuit education? This terminology, which seems to have come up, especially um, in online courseware development, I think could be understood in the context again of Jesuit education. We begin once more by taking a look at its definitions. Let me just do this. There are many definitions for instructional design, but the definition that we had been using and which I had introduced to you before is the one on the upper left, where instructional design is the art and science of creating an instructional environment where we bring somebody from a state where he's not able to accomplish a task to a state where this person is now able to accomplish the task before him. So much of instructional design is really that. It's the creation of an environment, it's the creation of a system wherein we could lead a person to a state where now he is able instead of just being unable to do something. Now, there are many instructional design models. If I may just once again share this with you. In the literature, these are only 12 out of many other instructional design models. What you're seeing in your screen is a classic instructional design model by Gagne and Briggs, where they propose that there are 3 phases, in the 9 events of instruction. I won't be explaining all of it, but I'll just give a run through, or a quick run through of all these instructional design models. Here's another instructional design model. These are all classics in terms of ID or instructional design. Here's another one, and another one, another one, and then another one, and then another one, and then here's another one, and then here's another. There's the ARCS model, and of course the very popular ADDI model. Okay, and there's the 4C ID model. As I said, these are, just parang a fraction of the instructional models that are available out there. But as you can see, if you take a look at all of these models, what it's really all about is just being able to create, once again, that environment that would help somebody learn something. So that's what we mean by instructional design. In fact, according to the author, one key literature in the area of instructional design by Seal et al., if you put them all together, you will come up with, in a sense, the components of instructional design. And as you can see here, you have here the analysis part, you have here the design and the development part, and then the implementation and the evaluation. In fact, one of the authors in the literature mentions that many of the instructional design models that are popular nowadays are really variations of the ADDI model, or the analyze, design, development, implement, and evaluate model. So all these components, if we take a step back, are components that we could actually see from our own Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. No? And I think we will see the connection between this instructional design and the IPP later. But I think one of the main takeaways in reviewing the literature on instructional design and in looking at our IPP model, I think the main takeaway from this exercise is to see how the IPP is more than just an instructional design model. Why is it more than just an instructional design model? Because while instructional design models are focused on learning a task, a skill, or a content, the IPP is focused on the holistic formation of the human person. So as I said, it might sound like a very ambitious and bold goal, but this is really why we are in the business of education, because in the end, there's a spiritual interest to it. And that spiritual interest is the formation of the person to lead to a state of human flourishing where he's able to do something for humanity, and also to find himself rooted in his experience of the faith. So in the IPP, as an instructional design model, we are also creating an instructional environment. But more than just an instructional design model, what we're doing in the IPP is that we are engaging learners where they are, and we are bringing them to a state where, as we've been mentioning, they could be flourishing as persons for others, with an appreciation, of course, for the pursuit of truth and also deep groundedness in their own faith. So this is where we're coming from. This is why, as I said, it's good to be able to look back at our own heritage so that we could find our own grounding and orientation in terms of how we can undertake this endeavor of making sure that we are that we can adapt to this new online educational environment. So I think the question now is, what do we mean or what do we understand by online education? Um, in the literature, there are many definitions for online education. In one paper, um, a group of authors tried to collate all these definitions and tried to examine the common elements that make up definitions of online education. And they've come up with certain common themes. In this case, what you're seeing in your screen are some of the essential elements of how online education is being defined. So one essential element seems to be that in online education, um, the use of technology is something that's very important because understandably, without this technology, we could not really conduct the instruction that we would like in an online environment. The other crucial element here is the time element, so that in online education, it could be conceived in terms of it being synchronous or in real time, or asynchronous, meaning that anyone can take it anytime a person wants to learn. No? And then, of course, one of the things that came up in the literature is that when we're talking about online education, online learning, online teaching, that these terms, while they might be different from each other, are actually synonymous terms, and the concepts that are used in defining these terms actually overlap with each other. There are some other common themes that emerge from this definition. Let me just highlight two. First is the notion of interactivity. No? So that in online education, despite the fact that the interaction that used to happen in face-to-face instruction was very palpable, this kind of interaction can still be replicated in an online environment by the use, of course, of technology to simulate that kind of interaction. So that while we may not have physical interaction in a face-to-face classroom, this interaction could be rethought or reimagined in various ways. So this interaction can be with the kind of content that students are learning. This interaction could be in terms of how students interact with each other. And of course, the more traditional interaction between the student and the professor or the instructor. The other thing in this theme is that the importance of recognizing that while it may not be obvious sometimes when we're teaching online, but one has to be cognizant of the reality of physical distance. Because with physical distance, many of the things that we take for granted in a face-to-face setup uh, are things that factor in greatly in terms of online education. For example, if students in a face-to-face classroom, you could basically control the behavior of your students. You could monitor their behavior, and you could more or less demand a kind of normative behavior in this kind of environment. But this does not seem to be the case in online education. In fact, students could be learning in some other place. They could be in a situation where the learning is not really conducive, and therefore this is something that we have to take into consideration as well. So all these common themes and elements in terms of defining online education have been put together in order to define what online learning or online education means. Here we have in the literature two definitions. I just highlighted certain phrases in this definition to emphasize variations and at the same time commonalities in these definitions. First, there's the fact that this learning is experienced through technology. Okay, so it's something that we find in these definitions as well. The other is that online education can be conceived synchronously and asynchronously, as you can see in the phrases that were highlighted in green. So when we speak of online education here, we're not really just talking about a fully asynchronous environment, nor are we speaking of a fully synchronous environment. And I think much of the decision in terms of where we would be leaning depends very much on the context of the learners that we are trying to teach. At the same time, one of the essential elements there, as we mentioned, again highlighted in pink, is that it is not dependent on physical location, so that you can be teaching uh, um, and have your student, you could be teaching anywhere, and your students could be learning anywhere as well. But not only in terms of location, but also in terms of time. This, especially in an asynchronous environment, students could learn at their own pace or at their own time and would not need to be there at the same time as you. So as you can imagine, there are many possibilities that open for us when it comes to online learning. If we put all these definitions together, I think we have to more or less uh, agree on how we understand online education. So this definition by Singh and Thurman, again, is a product of the study that they conducted in terms of collating all those definitions. So let's take a look at how they define online education. So first, they say that it is education that's being delivered in an online environment through the use of the internet for teaching and learning. So the crucial factor of being able to connect to the internet could make or unmake online education for us. Now, another aspect is that this online learning on the part of the students is not dependent on their physical or virtual collocation. Okay? And the teaching content is to be delivered online, and the instructors develop teaching modules that enhance learning and interactivity in the synchronous or asynchronous environment. So, in other words, we're taking all the Singh and Thurman are taking all the common elements of what it means to learn online, and basically gives us the parameters or the factors to consider, especially when we're teaching online. First factor is, again, the technology. Second factor is the notion of it as learning as something that does not have to follow kumbaga, a set time or a set venue, and that this learning focuses on creating a lot of interaction, whether that would be synchronously or asynchronously. Now, going back to the IPP as our own instructional design model, I think to be able to appreciate the IPP is to go back again to its spiritual inspiration. And that inspiration is in the writings of St. Ignatius, which is entitled The Spiritual Exercises. The Spiritual Exercises is actually a manual that teaches a person how to grow spiritually. So Um, but it's a manual that's written in a highly structured format, no? um, Eventually producing or resulting in an experience which is transformative for a person. So this is the main pedagogical inspiration for what we are doing in a Jesuit university. Now, in the spiritual exercises, the what we call the Ignatian paradigm imagines the relationship that's happening, the learning relationship that is happening through the spiritual exercises in terms of this framework. So, in taking the spiritual exercises, there is the retreatant who is being guided by a director in order that he or she may be able to discern how God is moving in his or her own life. So this threefold movement is the pedagogical inspiration for the IPP. No? So what's actually happening in the spiritual exercises is that the director proposes to the retreatant certain ways of praying, proposes content to pray about, and basically teaches the retreatant to be sensitive to God's will in the whole experience. In other words, what the director does is to create an experience for the retreatant so that he may be able to truly listen to how God is dealing with him directly. Likewise, it presupposes that the director who is accompanying the retreatant is also familiar with the ways of God. Otherwise, he won't really be able to guide the retreatant in terms of finding his or her own path. So this Ignatian paradigm is now replicated in an educational setting. No? Uh, and this educational setting wherein instead of the director and the retreatant, what is happening now is the relationship between the teacher and the learner. Now, similar to the Ignatian paradigm, what is happening is that the teacher also creates an experience for the learner so that the learner can appreciate and pursue the truth. No? Um, Likewise, the teacher is assumed, there's an assumption that the teacher is also familiar in terms of how to pursue the truth and is now paving the way for the learner to be able to find his way into attaining the truth as well. So if you put it together and if you replace the terms there in the spiritual exercises, once again, what happens in an educational setting, this one, and what happens in the spiritual exercises are very similar. And this is, I guess, the background in terms of how we imagine Jesuit education to be. In other words, it's not a very, you don't ram the truth down the other person's throat. No? But what you're doing is to help dispose the learner so that he may be able to appreciate the truth for himself or herself. Okay. Now, this relationship um, finds itself expressed in the concrete through the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. Now, this Ignatian pedagogical paradigm is composed of 5 principles. The first principle, the 5 principles are context, experience, reflection, action, and evaluation. Now, let's talk about the first principle, context. Now, the hallmark of Jesuit education is the care and concern for the student, or the care and concern for the individual. This is really something which is different from where other educators start from. Sometimes in our own teaching, our interest is could be phrased in the question, what do I need to teach? What content should I be teaching? Sometimes that's the first thing that comes into our minds when we're teaching. But in Jesuit education, that's not the first question that we ask. But the first question that we ask is, who am I teaching? Who will I be teaching? What kind of person will I be teaching? Um, and that makes a lot of difference in terms of disposition. Because in other words, where we're starting from is not just a matter of us trying to feed content into somebody, but we're trying to understand how this content could be absorbed very well by the person who is trying to learn. Again, if we compare this to its spiritual inspiration, in the spiritual exercises of Saint Ignatius, as I said earlier, the spiritual exercises or specs is a highly structured manual. No, it's not really meant for reading. No, and it's not meant to be followed by the letter. No, it's not meant to be followed strictly. No? While it was written in a highly structured way, Ignatius, in the annotations or in the initial instructions in terms of how this is to be taught or this is how to be given to a retreatant, says that the exercises should always be adapted to the situation and the disposition of the retreatant. So that's a very important principle that we as Jesuits always take note of. And likewise, it is something that we hope that you also would consider as as something that's very important as well, especially that we're all sharing in this enterprise called Jesuit Education. No? Uh, when you know, just the other week we were celebrating World Teachers Day, and for the most part, parang if we listen to the teachers, I think part of where we're coming from is not just the need to be able to teach the content, but where we're coming from is really that care and concern for the students that we are teaching. And I think this is really emphasized in that principle. No? That at the end of it all, parang you may be able, you know, we could teach our students so many things, but in the end, parang after going through Jesuit education, what leaves a very deep impression in a learner or in a student is the way through which we were able to communicate our care and concern for them in the subjects that we are teaching. So likewise, yun, parang context is very important. No? It's about asking at the start of every design process. No? It's about asking, sino ba ang tuturuan ko? Especially, and where are my learners coming from? Especially given the context that we are in right now. In this pandemic, what will be the state or the disposition of the learners that I'm going to teach? And with that at the back of our minds, with us being conscious of that, then we plan accordingly, then we design accordingly. Which leads us to the next point, next principle. And the next principle is about experience. So in Jesuit education, it's not just a matter of teaching content, but experience is supposed to teach students not only to learn a subject, but to learn how to learn. I think this is the biggest takeaway of Jesuit education, that what we'd like to form our students in is in their capacity to learn something, regardless of whether that is nursing or whether that is philosophy or theology, that they will be able to make use of what they have so that they can teach themselves how to learn the truth about something. So, in terms of experience, therefore, that's one very crucial uh, component of this experience. Does it provide the student with the scaffold to be able to learn something on his or her own? The second important thing here is that this learning is not just focused on the cognitive level, but that this experience should really fully engage the learner. It should be, in a sense, uh, engage even the affective side of a learner. Now, how could we imagine this? It's like saying, when I'm teaching something, no, I want my students to love this subject, to love what they're doing. No? Even the use of the term to love what they're doing is already effective. No? So it's not just I learned something, but I actually love what I'm learning in this subject. And it takes a great skill to be able to instill that kind of love for learning, no, in our students. No? This cannot be done by forcing students. This cannot be done by, parang putting up a lot of requirements. No, I think it is an art and a skill in itself. No, and I think the greatest compliment that we will ever get as teachers is when students, despite the technicality of our courses, will tell us that this is a subject that they actually love. No? And I think that is the whole point of the experience as a principle in the Ignatian Pedagogical Paradigm. How can we design our courses or our lessons in such a way that the students will care about it? No? That they will not just take it for granted, but they will become personally invested in it. No? I'm sure in nursing, parang there are so many things about nursing that can make students care about the subject. Precisely because I think this very discipline is really all about the care of another person. Um, and I guess parang this is where parang we could maximize and highlight even this aspect in the experience of our students. The third component is the reflection part. And what we're saying here is that in Jesuit education, it's not enough that a student just goes through an experience, no matter how wonderful it is, but it's it is ideal that this student is able to deepen that particular experience. No? And so reflection provides for the deepening of that experience to the point where a student is able to relish something deeply and become more fully invested in a subject because he's able to give it more thought. No, um, the philosopher always said that the unexamined life is not worth living. No, and I guess the takeaway here is that if we can instill this habit of reflection in our students, then it can lead to a point where students will be able to make the most out of their own lives as well. No, um, they won't be, parang people who will just be given to their emotions, no, but they will be thinking, reflective persons, no. Um, they can, in a sense, assess themselves further. They can take a look at themselves without having others mirror it for them because they're able to look back and deepen their own experience as well. The next fourth principle of the IPP is action. Now, action is really, again, another hallmark of Jesuit education. In other words, for Jesuits, it's not enough that you're able to know all these things. It's not enough that you're able to reflect about these things. What is even more important is that we see you acting on what you know. Um, and I think, in a sense, this is something very practical as well. No, people who are not able to articulate or express or act out something that they are passionate about or something that they truly believe in, um, parang it sort of limits uh, uh, your own experience as a human person as well. There's always a need to do something about it, no? And I think this action part is where we're trying to teach students, no, that what you know, find some application for it, no. What you've learned, try to express it, no. Don't just keep it to yourself. Learn to share it with others. Learn to express it so that others may benefit from it as well. So this is really the whole point behind the action part of the IPP. No? So that, when we're talking about persons for others, this is where the person who is flourishing is able to bridge that point where he becomes a person for others, because by now he is now always driven to act on what he knows. He is driven always to act for another person as well. The final part of the IPP is the evaluation part. And I think this is siguro a deeper level of reflection in a sense, no? Because in the evaluation part, we always would want to provide a point where somebody is able to assess the things that you have acted upon, the things that you have done. Kumbaga, it's another level, another round of reflection, so to speak. But in evaluation, the focus is in the totality of a person's growth. In other words, if I look back on my own experience, how did this lesson or how did this subject matter help me grow as a person? No? Um, did I, was there a change in my own perspective? Was there a change in terms of how I behave, and so on and so forth? So evaluation is not just an assessment of how much somebody has learned, but evaluation is an assessment of the totality of the learning experience and the totality of its effect on the person who is trying to learn. Now, all these principles, put them together, interact in this diagram. No? So the context, as I mentioned, underlies or underpins this whole experience. And what happens here is that the learning experience per se is captured in the interaction between experience, reflection, action, and evaluation. So it's this cyclical interaction that takes place in every learning experience of a student. So much so that if we place it now in the context of the teacher-learner relationship in the IPP, what we are doing in effect when we're teaching is, as teacher, we are creating this experience for the learner, which entails understanding the context of the learner, providing an experience which is deepened by reflection and motivated by action, which is always subjected to evaluation as well. So that once we carry out this movement in a learner, no, we sort of believe that this movement can lead a learner towards the truth, no? An appreciation and a pursuit of the truth. And this is the, kumbaga, this is the secret behind Jesuit education. No? This is what we're trying to communicate. This is, kumbaga, we're investing in this, no? Because we know, no, that a person who is truly formed in this educational system will at some point in his life manage to find himself or herself back towards the truth and back towards God. So in a way, as teachers, the way our contribution is in really forming our students to be that type of learner. No? And if you place it in the context of what we are doing again in the IPP, in courseware development, no, in a sense, nothing has really changed in terms of the principles that we're adopting. The only thing that has changed is that we have to be mindful of the context in which learning is taking place in this online environment. But it's still the same distinctive spirit that should be animating online instruction, especially in these times. So I think the practical part now is, now how do we apply the IPP concretely as instructional design? Okay. Now, as I mentioned, we need to be aware that online education is like entering into a new culture. And this new culture has certain elements that we have to be familiar with in order that we may be fluent in this culture. No? If we are going to a different place, part of that entails learning the language, learning the customs, no? Learning what is taboo and what is not taboo. Similarly, when we're teaching online, it's really about familiarizing ourselves with the cultural components that make up online education. Now, in the literature, in a highly cited literature by Linda Harrison, she mentions that in this learning environment, uh, there are many features in this learning environment that an educator has to be aware of, no? Because it influences and shapes the learning that is taking place in this environment. Take, for example, uh, one aspect of it is uh, in this environment, instead of a single to many or single to single communication, what is happening is a many to many communication. Think, for example, of what happens inside the classroom. In the classroom, you can't have everyone talking at the same time. When you have a discussion, especially when you're asking somebody to recite, it would be ideal to just have somebody speak out while the rest listen. But in an online environment, that's not exactly the case. Uh, the technology allows for several people to keep on communicating at the same time. So much so that, for example, while you are teaching through Zoom or Google Meet, or Zoom, for example, people could be communicating on the side using their group chats or communicating using private chat in a Zoom way. So in other words, there are many layers of communication that is happening in an online setting. No? Which, if this were a face-to-face environment, yung mga private chat na yun could be, the passing of crib notes, no? Mag-chismis ka niyan. But surely you'll be offended as a teacher when that happens. But in an online environment, that's part and parcel of what it means to teach online. So much so that there's a lot of interaction that you can encourage, or a lot of interaction that you may not be aware of that is happening even as you speak. No? So again, taking into account that distinctive feature is key to be able to teach successfully online. Now, there are many aspects here that are written. No? We've already talked about place independence. No? In other words, one, you could be lying down in bed and just listening to this lecture, but that's part of online education. You could be doing something else. You could be doing errands. You could be in a vehicle and still be learning at the same time and listening. No? Uh, but of course, it also has its pitfalls. No? In the case of our students, no, they could be having online classes, but then their parents would ask them to go out on an errand to buy something. No? So we have these experiences being shared by our students as well. But it's all part of this learning environment. No? Uh, the third point here, that it could be done anytime. No? So don't be surprised when students, for example, email you in the unholiest of hours, because in an online environment, time is something that's very different in a face that in a face to uh, than in a face-to-face setup, no? Where in a face-to-face setup, very clear yung ating office hours. But here, some students could be working on something parang early, very, very early in the morning and sleep during the day. No? So yun din, likewise for a teacher, if we design our courses well, you could actually prepare your lectures ahead of time and spend the rest of your time doing something else, because your lectures will actually still be the same lectures that you'll be doing anyway. No? And so yun, parang the point of it here is that um, this IPP, the only difference in terms of how we're using the IPP now is that we have to be very conscious of the different culture in an online environment. So going back again to elements of instructional design. No? The same elements in planning a course or in designing a course is further enhanced in an Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. Typically, when you're planning for a course, you're thinking always about outcomes, assessments, and activities. No, that's why part of what we did before was we were trying to align, no, our assessments with the outcomes, our activities with the assessments and the outcomes. Um, this is all part of what makes for a very cohesive and effective instructional design. No, so we're not in the IPP. We're not doing away with this model. No, but it is further enhanced in the Ignatian Pedagogical Paradigm, because if you take a look at what's happening in the IPP, what you have here is in the concrete. No? In teaching the IPP, we have what we call the pre-lecture, the lecture, and the repetitio. What is happening here is that um, the pre-lecture is really a statement of what it's really about preparing the student for the learning experience. Part of it is really telling students what they're supposed to learn. No, so that's similar to outcomes in a traditional instructional design. And after that, this pre-lecture is of course supplemented by the lecture or the activities in a learning experience. Now, the activities are for this lecture part is further reinforced by the repetitio, which is the reinforcement of what has been learned in a particular lesson or a particular topic. So if you take it all together in the concrete, pre-lecture, lecture, repetitio is not very different from the essential elements of instructional design. But as I said, the IPP takes this a step further, because this concrete method of teaching, which involves preparing a student for the experience, creating the experience itself, and reinforcing the experience, is situated in the context of the principles that we were talking about earlier, the IPP. No? So that these concrete steps that happens within a Jesuit classroom, no, um, is already being shaped by an understanding of the context, the experience, the reflection, the action, and the evaluation part. So all of these components will find themselves in each of these concrete phases in the teaching that happens uh, uh, in Jesuit education. So let's concretely take a look at how this is expressed. No? So as I said, this is about applying the IPP concretely to online courseware development. So going back, no, in this environment, no, what we're asking is first, no, when we're designing a course, going back again to the principles, context, the question we ask is, what do I need to know about my students at this time of the pandemic? So this is very crucial, because this is unlike any other situation. No? This is a very critical and extraordinary situation that we are in. In other words, we can't teach the same way that we're teaching, because we are not in the same situation as we were before. So that context, I think, already is a very big help in terms of how we can design our courses. The next part, in terms of the experience, as I mentioned, the aim is not just to create something where the students will learn, but to create or design a module or a lesson that the students will care about. Um, and that's going to really engage our creativity. That's why, in a sense, it's very challenging to create such a course, because you want your courses to really be memorable in a sense. No? And in this setting, no, there are the way we used to do it before would not be sufficient, no? Because you can be an effective teacher in a face-to-face setting, but when it comes to an online environment, the same flair that you used to have when you were teaching face-to-face could not be replicated, is difficult to replicate when you're lecturing like this through Zoom or through Google Meet, no? You won't have the same reactions to your jokes, no? Sometimes you will even begin to doubt if you are still an effective teacher or not. But that's all part of the experience, no? That's why it's really creating, it's a challenge in a sense to create an experience that will also engage the students even in an online setup. In terms of the reflection part, the question here is, how do we guide our students so that they can reflect deeply on what they have learned online, no? Um, Later, I'll show you parang a quick way to implement that in courseware, no? Um, the action part is once again, how do we provide opportunities for the student to express what they learn? So this could be in the form of another activity. This could be in the form of an assessment to be able to show parang whether students have really learned it or not. This could be in the form of a project and so on and so forth. Now, the evaluation part in the context of online courseware development is an assessment on this total experience. No? In a sense, we're trying to help our students evaluate on their own learning process, while at the same time providing us with information in terms of how we could design it so that we could be more effective in terms of how we design our courses online. So once again, all these things taken together in an online environment means creating precisely this learning environment so that the learner is able to still appreciate and pursue the truth despite the changing environment or despite the different learning environment that they are in. But it's still the same relationship. The teacher provides that learning experience so that the learner will be able to pursue the truth. Now, in the concrete, all these elements of the IPP, all these principles of the IPP could be expressed, no, in some of the components that we hope to find in a module, in a typical module, no. So a module is really the basic unit that you can find in a courseware, no. um, and the module could be a lesson or a group of lessons placed together in a structured and sequential manner. Now, a typical module on Moodle, and this is, I think, the template that we'll be using in terms of our design, has to have first overview, where you can have a teacher talking about what the module is going to be about or what the lesson is going to be all about. The second part is a statement of the learning outcomes, where the student gets to know what he's supposed to take away from this particular lesson or from this course. And then you could have here a series of learning activities that we can require our students to do as part of their learning in this experience. Now, in the design process, usually this is something that you clarify first, learning outcomes, then you create the assessments that will hit the outcomes. And the third part is then you plan for the learning activities. No? So logically, when you're planning, that's how you do it. But in terms of its arrangement in the course, it will look something like this. No? So the learning activities are everything that student will need so that he'll be able to achieve the outcomes. Now, prior to the part where the student can be assessed. Now, this learning assessment could also be inserted because of the technology that we have in the learning activity itself, so that it could become what we would call a formative assessment. No? Um, these things could be, could be provided in the middle of this learning experience. We could now insert the reflection part, no? Which is really a reflection on whether a student is able to learn the content in this particular module. Now, I made that distinction because one of the confusing things maybe is what's the difference between reflection and evaluation? Now, the reflection part focuses on the content which a learner is supposed to learn. Okay? The evaluation is focused on the entire learning experience. So, after the reflection part, the student could now be assessed. No? Now, this could be in the form of a quiz, in the form of a forum, or an activity that the student needs to learn. And now, this part, further resources, takes into account parang a best practice in many courseware that is being offered. I think one of the realities that we will have to face in online learning is that we cannot really give all the content that we used to give in a face-to-face setup. No? Otherwise, that will end up making online learning very difficult to do. Rather, um, further resources are there to provide students who are more enterprising a way to deepen their learning, no? A way to stimulate learning about a subject. No? But I think this is, where we're having difficulty, especially in the higher education unit. No? Because for many of us who are subject matter experts, there's always that feeling that, parang you cannot water down parang the things that you have to teach them, because there's the reality of uh, board exams that they have to take. There's the reality of, parang at least in your own estimation as a subject matter expert, there are certain things talaga that you need to cover. No? But I think part of that, I think the answer to that is to really strategically, at least while we're doing online education, no, to pick up once again the essential topics and to just provide all the other resources as further resources. Okay? Uh, Yun talaga parang that's the reality of online education. In fact, if you take a look at the courses being offered by MIT or Harvard or Yale, no, this is how they do it. Um, that's why parang it's still effective because they're able to bring across the content that they want to teach, but it's very academically rigorous as well. But all the other things that they want to bring out or give the students in a normal face-to-face setup, everything there they place under further resources. So the latter part, the evaluation part, is where the student is asked to look back at his own experience. In other words, uh, it could be implemented. I will show you an example later in terms of a feedback tool, no? Where the student can is asked, no, how would you rate your learning experience? Which part of the module did you find difficult? Which part did you find easy? What can you suggest as what could you suggest so that we could improve this course further? No? All of that is part of this evaluation aspect. Now, all these things, as I said, is while it's arranged in a certain way, they still exhibit aspects of the IPP. No? Because in the concrete, these principles are implemented according to pre-lectio, lectio, and repetitio. Once again, pre-lectio is really you preparing your students for the learning experience. Lectio is where you provide a very stimulating learning experience. Repetitio is where you reinforce that learning experience. Now, if you put all these things together, they might seem like a very rigid way of structuring a teaching experience. No? However, despite this structure is still being uh, uh, overridden by certain principles. No? And the principles that we have here is, first, in designing a course, we have to take into account the person. Cura personalis, that's the Latin phrase that we have for it. And it's, again, a hallmark of Jesuit education. In other words, in showing our care for the person, how do we express this in the way we design our courses? That the learning experiences should always be adapted to the condition of the student who is engaged in it. That's it. We're not asking students to adapt to us, no? Typically, parang part of our toxic academic culture is we're asking students to adapt to our standards, no? Um, I'm not saying that we should lower our standards. I'm saying that as a good teacher always knows how to adapt his content so that his students will be able to learn well. Um, so I think this is one, parang one of the things that you can find in really effective teachers. They're able to make something seem so easy to learn. No? Um, and part of that is really cura personalis, no? Once we understand who our audience is, once we are familiar with the students that we're teaching, then we could adapt our teaching to take into account their experiences. The second principle there is non multa sed multum. Now, there's a tendency for us to give everything we can give in an online education. No? But as I said later, no, this can only backfire because you know you, part of the reality that we have to accept here is that you cannot really give everything at the same time. But if ever there is a need to really give that content, space it out and chunk it even more, no? So that learning uh, will not overwhelm the students, no? uh, Part of a principle in Jesuit education is the focus on mastery. Only a few concepts, but many examples. No, that's how it it is done. No, and it's encapsulated in this principle non multa sed multum. No? Um, in an online environment, it's difficult to be able to pay attention for more than an hour or so. No, so this kind of setting, halimbawa, where I'm lecturing, is so difficult to follow. No, parang even we ourselves parang would find this so difficult to pay attention to, especially if we've been lecturing parang for an entire time. That's why part of it is breaking it down into manageable chunks so that our students will be able to digest it well. And then the latter part here is tantum quantum, which is loosely translated from Latin as much as it helps. Now, all learning experiences, this means adapting strategies and tools to the extent that it helps students to learn, instead of it becoming an obstacle to learning. So if you can see, the mindset here really is that Jesuit education is really very student friendly. No? Kaya nga minsan parang, maybe many of us would sometimes misunderstand why we're always trying to listen to what students are feeling, what students are experiencing, because this is really parang what we do in a Jesuit university. No, we're not like the other universities. No, we're a Jesuit university, and here, parang our primary concern is the welfare of our students. Okay, so going back again, when you take the prelectio, lectio, and repetitio, when you take all these principles, overriding principles, when you take this IPP together, as I said, this can appear in this particular template. It will look like this in a Moodle module, no, where you have again all these components. Now, if we were going to reverse engineer this so that we could see the connection between the IPP and all these components, no, or whether it's in Google Classroom as well, or some, no, it will look like this. No? So the pre-lecture part consists of the overview. You as teacher may be explaining in a video what the lesson is going to be about. No? So that's the pre-lecture. It's about you providing the learning outcomes for that course. Now, the further resources, while that may be found at the latter part of that template, no, is actually a pre-lecture for further learning. It prepares the student to learn further, no, on their own. No? So it's considered as pre-lecture as well. Now, the lecture part is the required activity or the required materials that you would provide the students. This is, properly speaking, the experiential part of the learning experience. No? Now, the repetitio finds itself in the reflection that you provide, which allows the students to look back at the content, the learning assessment that you give to assess whether the students have really learned what they're supposed to learn, and the evaluation part where the student is asked to once again take a look at parang how he is learning and to more or less evaluate how he is growing in terms of how he is learning. So now, where do you see all the IPP principles here? The context underlies all this. Pre-lecture, lecture repetitio, and all the components. All of it needs to take into account the context of the students. The experience part, properly speaking, is not just the lecture part, but it's really everything. What the students go through in an online course, that's all part of the experience part. But we could be more technical about this and say that the required activity could be the experience part of the IPP. No? The reflection part could be found in the reflection intervention in the module, but the assessment could also be a way of teaching students to reflect on the content. No? It could be a way of deepening their understanding of the content. So depending on the subject, the learning assessment could be used again as a tool for reflection. Now, for the action part, it could be a required activity as well that you can introduce. Or the action part could also be the learning assessment that you provide the students for students to concretely express what they have learned. Now, the evaluation part could be one in terms of the learning assessment as an evaluation tool for the content. But properly speaking, in our template, the evaluation part is a reflection on the entire learning experience, not just the content in that particular module. So as you can see, this is how the interplay of the IPP and the concrete methods of the IPP, this is how they play out in a typical module in our courseware. Furthermore, this total learning experience should be characterized by interactivity. No? Taking off again from characteristics of online education, no? This interaction could be conceived in terms of the interaction that a student will have with the content. No? So you can have a video where the student can forward, relax, and we have tools here which we call H5P that could enhance the content that you would have, no, so that it becomes more interactive for the students. Another kind of interaction is the student-to-student interaction, which could be implemented by making use of forums, making use of collaborative documents such as the ones being provided by Google, or in Moodle itself, there is Collabora, which could be used as a collaborative document. In terms of student to instructor interaction, we have also the typical tools. So within Moodle, you can use your Zoom link or your Google Meet link or something which is in-house here, Big Blue Button. You can also embed, for example, YouTube videos if you'd like to stream your YouTube videos. No? But these are not the only ways in which student to instructor interaction happens. This could also happen in terms of the feedback or the informal feedback that you would be giving students. When you respond to them to their email, that's an example of a student to instructor interaction. When you comment on their posts in a forum, that's an example of student instructor interaction. When you provide feedback in their essays, or that's another example of student to instructor interaction. Now, all of this parang could be, in other words, you can play with all of that interaction in the components of a typical module. So Once again. Okay, sorry, I messed up. Skip this part. Now, another crucial aspect of this courseware, that's why we're shifting to Moodle, is that unlike other learning management systems, this courseware can exhibit what is called as a concept called adaptive release, no? Wherein you could sequence the content where students would not be able to access a certain content until they have mastered a particular content, no? So this could be again a characteristic of the courseware that we're developing. At the same time, parang we would like to invoke principles that pertain to chunking. Now, what is a chunk? A chunk is a set of topics that we could cluster logically. No? And the question here is, when you're chunking, is to ask yourself, how much content do you have to present before you have to put in a natural break? You know? So this helps parang provide a sense of rhythm, a sense of pacing in terms of the course, and it could also provide a kind of a breathing space in terms of the content that we're providing, no? Because it's easy to get overwhelmed in online education. Now, you might ask, so what's the ideal size in terms of the chunk? No? The answer to that is it depends on the learners and the complexity of the topic you're teaching. No? And that's why part of the courseware design that we're asking, that we are developing, is that we should be conscious in terms of the duration of the activities that we put in the course. No? So that we will have a good sense of how much time would it really take. No? Parang imagine yourself going through that experience, and parang and in a sense parang look at parang if you're going to learn something and it will take you 5 hours to learn it, that's going to be really exhausting. But how could you chunk it so that you can take it in a bite-sized manner as well? Now, in the courseware that is now being developed by some of the faculty in SAS, no, in philosophy, for example, in ethics 1000 or ethics 100, no, what they did was they also scheduled some breathing space, no. So part of it is pacing the course in such a way that the students can take not only mental breaks but also physical breaks, no. You can't have somebody sit online straight for many hours, no. And part of doing that is really considering again a particular facet of online learning, which is in this setup, parang you have to deal with learners who have shorter attention spans. That's why when you look at courseware that is being produced commercially, which is being offered through Coursera or edX, parang a typical lecture that they would have would only last from maybe 7 to 12 minutes. No? Now, kung complex talaga yung topic, then they create another video which could be digested within that time, no? 7 to 12 or at least most 15 minutes. No? So everything is just bite-sized, no? That students can take a look at, and it will not bore students very much, no? If for example, we're going to give a lecture like this, no? Now, there are many things here which hopefully we will be able to introduce later on, no? Especially as we will be working with our instructional designers. Yung part of the way of designing the course is thinking in terms of time on task. No? Just imagine how many hours would it take you to typically teach a course? No? Now, thinking about that means planning. No? How much time would you devote to instructional time? Meaning, how much time would you devote when you're actually teaching, when you're checking papers, when you're responding to email? That's all part of instructional time. The time spent by the student on accomplishing a task is another time that you should be tracking. So that halimbawa, when a student is asked to do an essay or perform a particular activity, parang at time, parang knowing how much time it will take to realistically accomplish a task, can help you in terms of framing a course, no? So that, for example, you might have a 54-hour instructional time, no? But typically when you're teaching a course, parang, I mean, it's sometimes double that time. But if you're not conscious of time on task, we could actually be, parang a single subject might take 200, 300 hours for a student to accomplish, no? So that it really becomes tiring, not only for the student, but also for the teacher, who will need to spend more time over the instructional time that he can have, because the more things that you assign, the more things that, the more time that it will demand from you as well. But yun, it's all part of the whole idea of chunking, so that once you get a concrete sense of how much time it can take to teach something and students to work on something, then you could plan it accordingly, parang in the courses that we design. So all of these are just practical tips which we could talk about later on, no? But I think the main point of this is to show you how the IPP uh, is more than just an instructional design model for us, but how the IPP could be expressed concretely in terms of the courseware development project that we would like to undertake uh, to help our students through their own online learning experience. And at the same time, to also help you as faculty, no, to relieve you of the difficulty of having to really teach the way sometimes we have been teaching online. No? The possibilities that it offers would be, you know, if we could design our courses in such a way that all these lectures could be prepared beforehand, no? It can actually relieve us in the long run. No? We could imagine, parang you could be someplace else, but still, your lectures are there. You can just devote a certain time to checking what your students can do. And you're now able to respond to them more personally, because all the other burdens that come with teaching a class can already be attended just one time when you're designing a course. And every semester, all you have to do is just to refresh the course, repeat it, and then parang like software, it could be used every time, and you don't have to plan or work for it anymore. And you can devote yourself to being more of a facilitator, or at least to supplement and target parang gaps in the learning of the students, because the basic structure, the basic things that you want to put up can already be designed and implemented beforehand. So with that, I'll stop with that, no? And maybe entertain questions that you may have. So that's all that we have for today. Sige po. Would anyone have questions in terms of um, what was shared this afternoon? So compared to SAS, parang I think we have more than enough time for School of Nursing. And depending on the subjects that you'd like to start working on, then surely parang there's enough time to prepare for it as well.
Father?
Yes, yes, hi Melba. Good afternoon.
Kasi we were talking about online learning and there are three things that I would like to check first. This is for the courseware, Father, no? What we are talking about now is for the courseware,
Yes.
not necessarily our teaching in general
Uh,
as well. Because
Um,
we were talking a while ago of online teaching, but what we are doing right now is actually emergency remote teaching, because we do not yet allow our students to go on their own pace. So I
mhm.
guess it was that way. And the next is I guess before we go to enhancing the lesson, we need to recalibrate it first. That's why when you said we have to understand the students and how to make adjustments, I guess, as I mentioned before, it was so difficult for us to make adjustments precisely because, number one, there are too many lessons, and
Mm,
it's a holistic nursing experience that they have to go. And number
mm,
two, there were no teaching strategies that were told us based on online
mm,
teaching. So I guess that made it more difficult. So I just hope that recalibration, migration, as well as teaching methodologies can very well help the courseware development as well as us teaching at the moment, because this is precisely what we're doing right now. We are still on that level of emergency remote teaching, and
mm,
how much more if we are going to go in depth to
mm,
courseware, which is online learning and
mm,
teaching,
mm.
which allows students to be on their pace. So it would
Yeah.
help the teachers a lot if there is really a clear guideline on the different methodologies, because that is quite needed. Thank you, Father. That would be all.
Thank you, Melba. Yeah, so in effect, that's what we're trying to do right now, no? Parang and we have time at least for some of the other courses, but we could already start, parang, 'di ba? But our focus right now would be yung target muna natin, kasi it's really difficult to have everything. But we're sharing this. In fact, parang I'm always conducting this with the different schools. Because parang I guess we could pick up and learn from each other, no. Right now we're conducting seminars for instructional designers and course technicians, but surely parang that's why we're doing this. Hopefully we can keep on giving after this, kasi parang important is mga instructional tools, no, that we could use so that we could help teachers already in terms of developing content, no. So halimbawa, how to produce videos where you can do, parang and then parang how to make use of, make your content more interactive and so on and so forth. So in fact, in Daigler, parang there are already parang I think five online courses that we've created, no. We're trying to migrate it pa to Google Classroom to make it more accessible for everyone. Um, but yes, as you mentioned before, 'di ba, parang teachers would really need to be supported and accompanied because this cannot be done quickly, no. And that's why we're doing this, so that we could really, parang be more effective, and at the same time parang we could recover from a very stressful experience, no?
Yes, yes.
So thank you
Although,
for
additional,
also.
Father,
Mm,
okay, I was just expecting perhaps a more application
mm,
of the IPP,
mm,
because a lot of my colleagues are not
mm,
teachers, so they were
mm,
not taught how to make lesson plans,
mm,
and it would have been better if IPP was somehow, you know, introduced as a lesson in application,
mm,
because that would have been easier to assimilate. I had it before, and it took me years to really put my heart into it because it was a bit difficult. Although I did it on my first year in the grade school. The grade school taught me well. I just remember that it was how it was taught to us. That's why it was easier to grasp, especially if we're going to do courseware now, which is in a different platform, in a different methodology. So siguro more samples maybe
yeah,
for
sure,
this.
we could do that.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
I think we can do more examples na. And maybe with your pwede nga siya, parang we could actually work with some para mas concrete na how can really this be expressed in a nursing course, di ba? I think we will
Hirap talaga,
look at
Father, kasi
dropping that.
malawak. Malawak
Oh,
talaga siya. Mm.
yeah. Thank you.
Salamat din po.
Thank you. Um, Dean Pat, do you have something or
Uh, Actually, Father, regarding the interactivity that you have proposed for the courseware development. I appreciate that, Father, because it's really part of the OBE. We have to continue also applying the outcome-based education, which is necessary for our nursing students. So the interactivity part will really do well with what we expect to teach our students. So they can really be engaged in different type of activities during the nursing professional courses. So that I would like to also highlight on that, Father. And from what you have discussed, I clearly do understand that IPP is an instructional design that is supposed to be followed by all schools. So that is where we would like to focus in the way we also develop learning experiences for our students. So we just have to, practice, because it's rather difficult for us to discuss on something, because definitely we have to be flexible in terms of application, because the topics are kind of different in the different also in the various nursing professional courses. So yun lang yun. Siguro we can um, practice more on that and develop our skills, so that as we move along, we can also help ourselves and also our part-time faculty, especially in developing mga scenarios for learning specific to nursing situations, nursing courses. That I would like to really mention and emphasize on that, Father. But ever since the IPP has been looked up by other schools also, Father, because it's the only instructional design that includes reflection. That has not been emphasized in other instructional designs as practiced by even the colleges of nursing. Because I was able to present that in one of the conventions, and they appreciated very much yung reflection portion, because that is parang yun kasi yung kaibahan ng Jesuit education. Yun ang appreciate din yun ng ibang Father. Right now, yung mga nursing schools also would like to include that as part of their instructional design. They're following the same. And the courseware development, actually, when I introduced it to our Association of Deans, they were not familiar with it, Father. I guess if we can take off in this courseware development training, we will be the first university to come up with our own software that will apply specific to nursing education. Because they don't know anything about it, sabi nila, baka hindi yun ang gusto mong pagsabihin, Dean Pat, sabi niya gano'n. Sabi ko, hindi po, yun talaga po, yung software, parang development specific to nursing. Sabi kong gano'n. Yung modules lang yung hanggang doon lang kasi, Father, ang known sa marami, yung module making. After noon, wala na. So we rely on other learning management systems in handling nursing professional courses in other colleges of nursing. So I would like to make mention that I am excited to know more about courseware development, because this is going to be the first in the Philippines for the nursing program.
Sa school, if I may just share, thank you very much, Dean Pat, for that. No, it's really an opportunity for the School of Nursing to trailblaze in that aspect. Sa School of Education, parang sila Dean Bell tsaka sila Eding actually worked with CHED before in creating modules, no? And I told them, parang you're way ahead of everyone else with what you actually have, no? It's all a matter of converting that into yung online platform, no? Into online courseware. Kasi they have the content, and then we have the technology to convert, in fact, parang what they had prepared already, no? They have 15, I think, no? So parang imagine, parang if after a semester they're able to convert that, parang they would have 15 courses na ready from start to finish, no? That can be converted into courseware. And yun din yung difficulty ng ibang school of education, kasi nandun lang sila sa course pack development, eh. But implementing it as software, courseware, doon pa nangangapa yung ibang mga tao. But it's we parang kaya parang I know how to do it. We know how to do it. We have the technology to be able to do that as well, no? And I think we could make it work for us, and then hopefully it could be of help also to others once we've shown them parang how we could do it.
Yes, Father. Because that will really work for our students, both students who have difficulty as well as those enjoying yung internet, very good internet connection. So they can always go back to it anytime they want, even if the internet connection is not good. So they can continue doing that and learn from every situation, whether asynchronous or synchronous activity.
And I think it's an advantage that some already in the School of Nursing are already, parang familiar with Moodle, no? Konting ko na lang, yung ibang tools na lang actually yung kailangan nating i-ano doon. And also parang using other tools such as how could we make use of video, and then
Actually, Father Oji, if I may share, my personal experience with Moodle, I had very much difficulty. I would like to mention that, no, but I was encouraged by a co-teacher, and she told me, Ma'am Pat, after 2 months, I am telling you, makaka-adjust ka na talaga. And so what I did was to really explore yung resources that will apply, especially in the graduate program. And then the students in the graduate program kasi are quite different from the undergrad. Kasi yung graduate students, mas gusto nila yung nagkakaroon kami ng mga interaction na ganon, but I always limit it to mga 1.5 to 2 hours lang kami. No, but I only highlight on the things that I would like to emphasize when talking about a certain topic. Yun lang yun talaga ang inaano ko. And then I require them to do or engage in interactive discussions, yung mga ganon. Pero dahan-dahan na ano ko, but those concerns that I was not able to address, Father, like it has something to do with yung technical ng Moodle, ginawan ko na lang ng paraan na iba muna, because I told myself I cannot be hard on myself. I cannot 100% learn everything at one time. So I know in due time, sabi ko, I'll be able to learn every now and then I learn new things, Father, especially in handling mga Zoom, ganyan. So meron lang talagang time na medyo sabay-sabay yung mga concerns, and so you just have to handle it. Parang in fairness din sa iyo, wag naman masyadong ma-stress ka. Dahan-dahanin mo lang. Parang ganun lang yung ginawa ko, Father. And I share that with my colleagues and even with our faculty in the School of Nursing, because I know I cannot learn all these things overnight. I'm giving myself enough time to make some adjustments, and until I fully am able to say na I am confident and 100% convinced na I am doing well in handling my Moodle class. I cannot say that I am perfect even after 5 months. So yun lang yung aking ano, siguro yun din yung gusto ko iparating sa kanila, Father, na sige lang, pagbigyan lang natin yung sarili natin. Dahan-dahan matututunan din natin yun. Mahaba pa naman ang panahon. Sige lang, ganon.
Yeah. I think parang it can really be intimidating. Pero yung its benefits in the long run will be worth it, no. Marami na sa faculty have migrated early on. And sinabi ko sa kanila parang pwede ba kayo ang mag-testimonya no. So ano lang po, sige lang po, let's just be patient with each other. We will accompany you along the way, and make sure that we will all do this together, no. So yun po, as long as I'm here, we'll ano, we'll uh,
Father,
we'll journey together.
Father.
Yes po.
I guess the other schools are thinking of, I guess kasi narinig ko rin to sa iba from the webinars that I listened to. It is so difficult for nursing to have a courseware precisely because there are instructional simulation studies as well as other things that needed to be applied. So would that mean that we will do it also to be able to be included in their courseware? Or shall we pick from other videos to be included in the courseware? Because otherwise, it would still be a module, not necessarily a courseware. So I guess, kasi ang usual na courseware, Father, is more on conceptual mas maraming concept. Unless nakapag-tie up tayo talaga sa yung talagang gumagawa ng simulation for Ateneo. Yun talaga masasabi natin courseware tayo. But generally, at this time, siguro kaya sabi nga ni Ma'am Pat, di pa rin ready ang ibang school because it is really daunting to realize that if we are going to make our courseware, that means we have to design also not only the instructional design, but also the simulations that have to be there. Otherwise, kung yun lang, baka concepts lang ang pwede nating maibigay. Because that would be a different story as well.
I parang I know how we can do it in terms of parang doing that simulation. I've looked up parang how they tried. Parang it's not going to be parang similar to AI, but the technology that we have, yung H5P, can actually do those simulations that they're using sa ibang online nursing programs. But I think we will just have to work closely to be able to do it. But it can be done. Yeah.
Actually, Father, if I may mention, yung SLS natin, yung simulation learning system, actually is an alternative learning approach. And even without the practice mannequins, you can learn from that. Kaya lang, Father, we are still trying to perfect yung ano ng use ng SLS. It's similar to that because that is also courseware, Father, di ba? Yung simulation learning system ng Elsevier. Actually, it is one of the recommended alternative approach to learning nursing, even without the practice mannequin o kaya yung virtual laboratory na pinag-uusapan. No, the president of the Association of Deans had asked me to give her more information about it because they are trying to consider it also in St. Louis University sa Baguio. Kasi that is really a recommended solution to the learning experience of nursing students. Kasi nandoon lahat ang pwede mo gamitin. Plus, I would like to suggest if we can also learn, siguro, Father, yung the use of standardized patients while preparing for online instruction. We can also make use of that and still come up with an approximation of what the real setting would demand from the students, no? Minus lang kasi yon because I don't think they can really open the hospitals for affiliation
Mm.
right away. Maybe later, but not. I don't think it can happen in January. But
Mm.
I'm hoping because we are trying to prepare na the different hospitals that we have here in Davao and Tagum, Father, so that we can extend even to that part of Davao para ma-accommodate yung mga students for the related learning experience in case they will already open for affiliation.
Okay. Din pa siguro it would be very helpful if we could really, parang identify again yung in the concrete yung courses, and then we can have, let's say, a committee.
Yes.
So kasi right now parang there are so many things that we're considering, but if we
Mm-mm.
could like focus, para we could really come up with really concrete practical solutions already, parang as our next steps,
Yes,
um,
Father.
so that would
Uh,
help, para we could really focus what we could do, parang ano bang software that we could adapt in order to address parang some of the uh,
we
um,
will send you Father. We'll send you the short list of courses so that we can already begin. I guess we can schedule another courseware development training session next week. Will that be possible, Father?
yeah, that's fine with me. Yeah. See,
If
yeah.
Yeah, but I know there are some concerns with regard to their time, the time for vacation because they're already considering sem break
Mm.
starting next week. But since I just would like to reiterate what Ma'am Gina has mentioned, that we can only declare vacation after we have submitted, for example, yung summative assessment results. If there are students already who are opting to take the final summative assessment, this week is the whole week for the final summative assessment, and then next week we will start with sem break, but after siguro submission na, Father, ng FSA.
Mm.
So yun, so we can still continue with our courseware development training. Will that be Monday next week, Father?
Yeah, pero pwede naman po na we could actually kasi tomorrow I'll have a session with the instructional designers. We could record it and then just have the video siguro with send it
Available.
to everyone. Oh, para you can watch it at your own pace.
Okay.
I'm sure maybe for some they'd want to, parang take some time off. Maybe. So it's an alternative. In other words, parang that's it can be done kasi it would be something like this, and then
Meron lang talaga din, Father, na gusto din nila yung ganito talaga so they can directly ask questions if in case anything may pop up
sige po,
anytime.
I'll just whatever works for you, I
Sige pa.
will
We'll talk about it later.
sige po, talk
We
about it, and then what
will
works for you, we'll do it.
Opo.
I guess we have to understand that sem break is scheduled by the school. We have to follow it. It is not defined as passing the grade. It is defined as a semestral break for everyone. So I guess we have to respect that because we already have that in the CBA. Mahirap na yung may conflict tayo. We have to be clear with that, Father.
That is
Kasi
the point.
hindi naman oo, pero document naman kasi yan, Ma'am Pat. That sem
Range.
break is break. Let us not go beyond it para hindi naman din mahirapan yung teachers natin. We are going to do coursework and we are going to
Sandali
prepare for
ha.
the
Sandali, Mel.
end.
That's the reason why I am arranging it with Father Oji because we are actually considering the vacation. We still have to know from Ma'am Gina yung sem break or whatever Kaya nga, we are honoring the CBA. Okay? So whatever will be scheduled, it all depends on those who would like to hear it or just wait until it will be available online. So you can go back to it at any point in time na convenient para sa inyo. We will not eat up your sem break just to be clear about it, okay? But we cannot stop manggod, kaya nga we will make it available lang for everybody's access.
Ma'am Pat, ang tanong din naman kasi ng karamihan katulad ko, why do we have to do it now when we also have to prepare for the second sem? November 9 na po yung opening. Ang hirap po ngayon dahil bago ang ating platform, bago po lahat. Tapos ngayon mag-aaral naman tayo ng courseware na isasama natin. Oo.
Ganito kasi, when we schedule it during school days, ayaw ninyo. Pag bakasyon naman, ayaw din ninyo. Kasi bakasyon, paano na? We are left with no time to learn new things. Yun lang. So we can adjust naman. We will consider. Alam naman natin yun. Because we also consider yung people, concern. Yung orientation natin, kagaya ng sinabi niya ni Father, yung cura personalis, we also take care of our own faculty. So we consider that. But then we cannot stop everything just because ganyan meron talaga tayong parang kumbaga timpla-timpla sa mga panahon na ganyan. So that is how we are trying to address yung particular na problem. Yun lang.
Let us remember, ma'am, that this is an extra job. This is not the main job. Kaya kailangan din siya ng extraordinary time na hindi dapat masaklaw yung time na para sa faculty. Kasi kung sana nilabas ito noon, kasi alam ko naman bakit para saan ito eh. We need enrollment. We need these things. So, we have at least to somehow also listen to the teachers because at this time, hirap kami nung first semester na naghintay kami, kailan kami tuturuan. Tapos ngayon, may courseware tayo. Ilang weeks lang yung break natin, magkaklase na agad. Tapos, we have to prepare. We have to prepare po. Yun lang yung ma'am. Kasi madali lang itong sabihin. Hirap talaga siya, Pat. This is a new thing for all of us.
Sige lang, we will consider whatever will be acceptable para sa...
Thank you po. Thank you. Please do.
I think I agree with Ma'am Melba po.
Yes, I know, Grace.
Agree po ako sa kanya.
Oo, I understand. Sige. Sige, Father.
Kasi mas cooperative kasi kami pagka may time tayo na lahat tayo ay medyo nakakahinga. Kasi ako naman, wala akong problema, ma'am. I will work. Lalo na pag ganito, education to eh. Masarap tumulong. Kaya lang, ma'am Pat, nagsasabi din ako ng totoo na medyo sandali, ma'am, kasi nawarla ako nung first sem. Tapos, pag may reklamo ang estudyante sa amin, binabaling lahat. Hindi nga kami naturuan ng tama ng methodology. Tapos, pinagtatakan bakit mabigat sila, nabibigatan. Ito yung mga dilemma ng isang teacher ngayon, ma'am Pat. Kaya lang sabi ko, kung pwede po, bigyan niyo muna kami ng oras makahinga tapos gagawa kami ng panibago ngayong second sem because I will really have to study ID myself. If nobody will give it to me, then I will study it myself. Kasi hindi po pwedeng magtuturo ako ng wala yon. IPP lang, no, it's not enough because there are applications and skills that we have to do. IPP, baby, the main. I know IPP. I taught in the grade school for 5 years, we used that. Dito lang ako sa college, hindi na shadow natin na-apply, pero ina-apply ko naman siya sa aking platform, sa aking, kaya naintindihan ko yung IPP, pero maigi din yung maintindihan natin ng ibang ID kasi pwede natin ma-add yun sa ibang technology natin sa learning ng nursing. Kasi may skills tayo, hindi lang concept. So, katulad ng experiential learning, Father, alam niyo po, mahaba kasing oras namin. I tried so many times. It takes up time eh. Kaya kailangan pag-aralan talaga kung saan siya ipapasok. Kasi I tried that before. Sabi ko, patay, pag ang aking 3 hours na klase, papasukan ko ng maraming experiential learning because I did the pattern before for 5 years. So, hindi siya madali sa nursing i-apply kasi maraming concepts. Marami talagang concept, Father. Anyway, yun lang po. Thank you, Ma'am Pat. Thank you.
Sige, thank you. So,
just talk it over. Tapos, as I said, parang we'll whatever works best for everyone, we'll do it.
Yes, Father. basta we will make it available lang for everybody para anytime if they think they have the time, they can always go back to that and learn.
I think parang the next steps really parang in terms of the use of online instructional tools can might be helpful parang in terms of parang our preparations as well. So, you know, so bukas sa mga IDs yun yung aming ano. So hopefully we'll record it, no? So and make it available for everyone as well. Nandiyan man Roy, makapunta ka man bukas sa i-send ko pa pala yung invitation.
Yes, Father, I will be there.
So sige po.
Maraming salamat, Father, sa
Thank
inyong...
you.
Thank you,
Thank you po.
Father.
Thank you po for everyone. Thank you for your time
Thank
and
you.
patience.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
you,
you.
Father.
Thank
Sige.
you. Bye, Lisa.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you
Bye.
po.
Bye. Hi, bye, Apple.
I'll email you, Father.
Thank you, Father.
Sige po. Sige po din, Pat. I'll just wait for your email.
Hope to see you, Father, in time.
Thank you po.
Thank you, Father.
Hi, Apple. Long time no see.
Lagi, naunsa naman,
Uy, kumanta ka pa ng nung Teacher's Day celebration nakita ko.
Abi man ako dito mapilian, oy, kanta-kanta ko pagkayabag na ulaw ko, Father, oy.
Oh, basta pinasing-kasing, okay ra, eh.
Lagi, unta magkita ta, Father, in time. Hapit na unta.
No?
Wala ta ka gawas, Father, no?
Wala na gani.
Unta sa Pasko magkita na
Yes,
punta pareha sa una. Ingat,
Okay.
Father, stay healthy.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Salamat. Thank you po. Bye-bye.